I spent 12 years in school. And I did elementary school, I did middle school, and I did high school. And for 12 years of my life, that was what I knew. That was how I lived my life. And you get up in the fall, and you go to school, and you come home, and you do chores and homework and extracurricular activities. And that's what I knew. 12 years. Then one day, surrounded by family, friends, people who assumed they were my friends, people I didn't really ever want to see again necessarily, I found myself wearing a really weird, odd, silly-looking hat, a nice robe that they called a gown, and I threw the hat in the air, and I graduated. And that was it. There was sparklers, there was party favors, and parties, all the things that go with that. And then that's when the true fear of everything sets in. 2 words. You've done this, you've done well, you've graduated. Huzzah, good for you. Now what? I mean, usually by the time a person graduates, the plan is that they go away to college, right? And what effectively happens is that we create people who for 12 years have known school. Day in and day out, that's what they do. 18 years old, legally an adult, not anywhere near being like a full-on adult. We ship them off to be on their own. We tell them, sign these papers, take up this insane amount of debt so that you can go to college. Sign these papers, and this little plastic card will get you things sooner, and you don't have to worry about paying it until much later. Not to mention all of the other things that you have to do. There was no one to wake me up for classes when I was in college. You know who had to make all of my doctor's appointments? Me. I was expected to do all of these things. And it becomes this sort of overwhelming sense of fear and anxiety for some people. And what we believe is that in the midst of all of this, in this brave new world in which we find ourselves in, we believe at times we can't make it. We don't think we're good enough, we don't think we're smart enough, or this, that, or the other thing. But the fact of the matter is, we can make it, and we will, and we have done it. That's what we do. This is how you grow. It's a massive upheaval. It's the one word that all Presbyterians secretly balk at. Change. We hate that word. Our motto seems to be, as a denomination at times, but we've always done it this way. Where we have to keep doing things the same way over and over again because we know that it works. I think part of it, though, is because we know the other side. Change is scary. It's difficult. It's hard. And yet in the midst of all of that, in the midst of the difficulties with that, there's this great sense of irony because the one true constant in the world is that things will change. There's no way to get around that fact. Everything will be going one way for a while and things will be fine, but it can't last that way forever. Be it some scientific force, be it God, something is going to come along and create a change because change is what's necessary for growth and development. It's going to happen, which is not a bad thing, but it's scary. It's terrifying, and I fully get that. I understand that, but that's okay. Because if the constant of the world is that things change, then it's supposed to happen. For good or for bad, for better or for worse, whatever happens, happens because that's the way it's supposed to happen. I've talked to people who have taken issue with the notion that God is in control of all things. Well, then why is there this? Why is there that? And the answer, simply put, is I don't know. I don't know why everything happens in the world the way that it does. I wish that I did, but what I do know and what I believe is that in the midst of those changes, in the midst of those massive upheavals, the constant is not that it is going to happen, but instead the constant is that God is at the center of it. Our reading from 2 Kings this morning talks about change. Essentially, the changing of the guard. Two men, Elijah and Elisha. Elijah being the prophet Elijah. You may know him from such stories as the widow and the prophets of Baal. And then there's Elisha, and you may know him because his name has an S in it. We know Elijah. We know Elijah so much that he's one of the ones that gets to show up with Jesus during the time when he goes up on the mountain. They're coming from Gilgal. Gilgal was the place where the monarchy was established. This was the location where it was that God finally said, if you all want a king, fine, here's your king, good luck with that. The monarchy was established. And then we fast forward a bunch because this is 2 Kings. And we've already gone through some of the monarchy. We go through people like David and Saul. And we find ourselves with Elijah and Elisha. Where they are going next is Bethel. And it's important to point out where they've been and where they're going, because Bethel is the place of the royal sanctuary. So that's where they were going. Do you see what's kind of happening here? The history of the people is being performed in a way by Elijah and Elisha, moving from the establishment of the monarchy to the seat of power, where the monarchy has their sanctuary, where they can rest and relax some. And that is where they are heading. But in order to get there, they have to cross a river. Now, the story of Elijah and Elisha crossing the river is interesting because all throughout this, Elijah keeps telling Elisha, wait here, because I have to go here. And Elijah's like, I'm not leaving, buddy. He says, I'm not going anywhere unless I'm going with you. And so he goes. And it's fine. That's how everything was supposed to happen, but it kind of underlies this sort of codependency fear that Elisha might be dealing with. Almost being afraid to be on his own, to be left to his own devices. He's like, I'm not ready for that. I can't do that, he says. So I need to be with you. I need my safety net. I need to keep learning because I'm not you. And then they get to the river, and Elijah asks Elisha what he wants, and he says, well, I want a double portion of your spirit. And Elijah's like, awesome, good luck with that. Let me know how that works out for you. And so in order to cross the River Jordan, a very important river in the history of God's people, Elijah takes off his mantle, rolls it up, smacks the water, and it parts. And they go across. And after they go across, this is where we get the neat scene, right? The chariots of fire. There's the horses and the chariots of fire. And then there's this whirlwind. And Elijah's taken up into heaven, and he's gone. Elisha is left there freaking out, panicking. Where did you go? What just happened here? And this is what he sees. This is what he knows. And he knows that now the one thing that he was dreading the most has just happened. He's on his own. For years, he had one person with him. That one person was Elijah, the one person who had his back, who was teaching him to do everything he was supposed to do. And now he just, toddles off in a spaceship or whatever. He rips his clothes, a sign of distress, a sign of weeping, and there's gnashing of teeth, and it's terrifying and it's sad. And so all of this is occurring in front of other prophets. So they witnessed this too. They didn't cross the river. Only Elijah and Elisha did. And so then Elisha notices the mantle that Elijah used to part the water. And he takes it up, he picks it up, and he hits the water with it. And it parts. And this is in front of the company of prophets and anyone else who happens to be around. This is what he does. And then he realizes in that moment a fundamental truth. Now it's my turn. He was literally given the mantle of Elijah. And now it is up to him, as the adult, to do what he needs to do. To be the person that God needs him to be. There's this ideal that Elijah would be better than Elisha. And that's not necessarily the case. They're just completely different. You know what one of the questions I absolutely hate in restaurants is? Coke or Pepsi? In some restaurants, you don't even get a choice, to be honest. But like, there's this, still to this day, this brand war of, oh, do you like Coke or do you like Pepsi? And it's like, it's pop. It's all fine. It's filled with way too much sugar and carbonated water and all of that. Are they completely different? Yes. If you give me a can of Pepsi and a can of Coke, I will gladly tell you which one is which whilst being blindfolded. It's not that hard to figure it out. But they're similar. And they're both pop. They both go through the same canning process. When you get them at restaurants, they come in these giant bags where they add soda water to it. All of these things. So while they are completely different, they're also still very much the same. And I think that's the key. Because what the people of God were going to go through was completely different. God raises up certain people to do what is needed to do at certain times. The people that God raises up now do things differently. The people that God raised up in the past did things differently. Elijah and Elisha are two completely different people. Yes, their names are incredibly difficult to say together because you will mess them up 9 times out of 10, and I do that too. But they are different. There is continuity there. Yes, they both serve the same God. They both carry and wield the same amount of power, but they're different. And so now it's not up to Elijah to lead the people into this brave new world, but it's up to Elisha. And so he must do things on his own, in his way. No matter what the change is, there are constants around. While things change, God doesn't. In reality, while we know that things change, like we get this idea, we've seen it, that things change over time. We understand that, but we don't. The reason that we don't necessarily understand that is because we'll often be like really surprised when an unexpected change happens. As if that wasn't always on the table. As if that wasn't always in the cards. And really what it just boils down to is, again, we just don't like change because change is scary. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if we could be hurt physically or emotionally. We don't know what will happen when we take that leap of faith. But change doesn't have to be as terrifying if we realize the constant of it is not that it is an inevitability, but that God is there in the midst of the change. Our gospel text from Luke this morning shows us some more changes. It was a very drastic change. if we're being honest, we're taking this all the way back to 144 AD in Rome, where a man named Marcion created a heresy. Heresy being something that is so incredibly wrong that you have to say, whoa there, buddy, this is terrible. A lot of the early church fathers were weeding through heresies and making sure that we had sort of our theological ducks in a row. And they came across Marcionism, created by Marcion. And what was his heresy? That the Bible contained two gods. You had Old Testament God, who was the creator, but he was mean, and he was cruel, and he was nasty and vicious. And by the time you get to Jesus and the New Testament, well, that's a completely different God. Did a full 180 here, right? There's no possible way that Mr. Fire and Brimstone from the first half of the book can be the same as Mr. Lovey-Dovey Feelings in the second half of the book. So he reasoned, and again, big heresy here, he reasoned that it was two separate gods. Now, there's a lot more nuance to it than that, but that is what it boils down to. It's a heresy. But I get it. The Old Testament is tough to read sometimes. There's a lot of violence in the Old Testament. And it's easy, if you're being cynical enough, and if you're not paying attention close enough, to see how Marcion came with this line of thought. Am I saying he's right? Absolutely not. I'm saying it's easy to get duped when you don't do the careful reading. Now, what does all of this have to do with the reading in Luke? Well, it has everything to do with it. Because the fact of the matter is, the Old Testament is the Old Testament, the New Testament is the New Testament. And while there is consistency about being about the one God that we worship, they're different books. They have to be different books because they do different things. And because things were different, people and God act differently. So Jesus, in this section, is going to Jerusalem. And we know what's going to happen once he gets there. But before he gets there, he's going to pass through a Samaritan village. Now, what's interesting about that is the fact that there's just a cultural difference there. And we will get into this a little bit more in depth later. But suffice it to say for now, they each think the other one's worshiping on the wrong mountain. So culturally, that's why they don't get along. And there's a lot more history to unpack with that, but right now, in this day and age, that's why. And so, as they're traveling, Jesus sends some people along, and they're like, hey, Jesus is making his way through. He's heading to Jerusalem. Is it cool if we hunker down here for a night or two? And they say no. And you can assume, oh, they're jerks. But what it is they're holding true to their cultural norms. That's how they live their life. Is that right? No. We're supposed to be hospitable. We're supposed to be nice and kind and everything else. But they were doing what they thought they were supposed to do. And so James and John, they're like, no, this travesty will not stand. And they talk to Jesus and they say, hey, would it be cool with you if we call down fire from heaven to burn them all alive? That's like a tad bit of an overreaction, if you ask me. And yet, in their minds, they were completely justified in suggesting that. They had been slighted. Jesus Christ himself had been slighted. Therefore, vengeance. Really following the whole sort of Old Testament idea of wrath, 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 smite, smite, smite. And yet what Jesus does then is very interesting because he yells at James and John. He rebukes them. And he tells them no. And he doesn't make a big fuss about it. And that's what's interesting, because you would think, like, if you're traveling, you want to be on like a set path, right? You want to be able to get to where you're supposed to go when you're supposed to be there. So any deviation of that'll add time, get you really panicky and stressed out, right? But he just doesn't talk about them anymore. There's no other mention of this village. We don't know what happens to them, but Jesus just doesn't dwell on it. He just says, okay, and toddles off to another village. It's because God maybe is operating a little bit differently than what people are expecting. Maybe it's not all wrath, 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 smite, smite, smite. Maybe it is love and forgiveness. Does that mean two different gods? Absolutely not. It just means that different situations and different goals require different tactics and different things to be done. Discipleship also looks a lot different. It's interesting that this is paired with this little diatribe about discipleship, because first we have someone say, "Oh, I'm going to follow you anywhere, Jesus." And Jesus says, "Awesome, I'm homeless. Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Okay. Not really sure if it's not a great way to get people to work for you, Jesus. You don't tell them that, there's a very good chance that you could be homeless. You want to give them creature comforts, right? You want to say, oh, you're going to get the big mansion and the fancy cars and this, that, and the other thing, right? That's what you should do. If you want people to follow you, you have to give them a little bit of something. Jesus sees another person, and he says, "Follow me." And he says, "Yeah, absolutely. I have to go bury my dad first." And he says, "No, just let the dead bury their own dead. You go do the work I'm telling you to do." Not a good way to get volunteers, bud. That's, people would read that and be like, that's very kind of problematic and mean. Like, it doesn't look right. It doesn't sound like something that Jesus should be saying. And then another person says, "Oh, I'm going to follow you, Lord, but first let me say farewell to those at home." And he's like, "Oh, then you're not worthy of the kingdom." Ouch. And yet all of these things, this is what discipleship is supposed to be. This is Jesus selling the idea of being a disciple to these people. And you think, stop. You can't tell them that. You can't tell them that they're going to be exhausted, that they're not going to have the things that they want to have, but they might have some of the things that they need, but not necessarily all of them. You can't tell them that it's going to be hard, that you have to put Jesus Christ first and do what Jesus wants. You can't tell them that. You have to make it easier. You have to add the sugar to make the medicine taste better. And Jesus is like, I ain't got time for that. The problem with Jesus was a problem of expectation. And Jesus didn't fail. He just wasn't what the people wanted, because there's a difference in wants and needs. And what they needed was a change. A change not only of their theology, but a change of themselves. Because at the end of the day, when you encounter Jesus Christ in your life in some way, if you are not changed, you're doing it wrong. We don't read the Bible to change the Bible. We are changed because we have encountered Jesus Christ through the Bible. Jesus changes us. And that is a fact. The kingdom of God is unexpected. It could show up whenever and wherever and however it so chooses to do. Where you would expect wrath, where you would expect vengeance and fury, instead you get mercy and you get grace. The ministry of the kingdom is about discipleship, and being a disciple looks a whole lot different than what people think it does. Now, is it just all the hard stuff? No. It's important to know. One of the nice things about Jesus is that as many things change, Jesus does not. Jesus stays the same, the true constant in the world. Whereas we will change, society will change, and everything around us will change, well, Jesus doesn't. So whatever change you go through, whatever change we see or witness, wonderful news, everyone, Jesus is still there. When things change with Jesus at the center, everything is going to be fine. We don't have to be filled with fear and trepidation, because instead we are filled with hope and wonderment. Amen.